stopped on your way to university by a soldier at a checkpoint, banned from living in a town because you are Palestinian, watching your home demolished by a bulldozer, facing aerial bombardment night after night. This is the reality faced by Palestinians on the ground in the West Bank, the Gaza Strip, in Israel and in exile. A system of rule that oppresses Palestinians simply because they are Palestinian. This kind of regime that discriminates against one people because of their race, religion or ethnicity has a term: apartheid. While the word apartheid is mostly associated with the system of white minority rule in South Africa, it's actually a crime not limited to any one country or regime. Under international law, apartheid is defined as any inhumane acts committed in the context of systematic discrimination and domination by one racial group over another. So, how can we be sure that this definition applies to Israel? When it was founded in 1948, the Israeli state started to implement laws that discriminated against the indigenous Palestinian population. Israel passed laws which prevented the over 750,000 Palestinian refugees forced out of their homes during the founding of the Israeli state from returning, whilst at the same time allowing Jewish people from around the world to migrate to Israel as citizens. The laws that Israel established upon its founding set the framework for the racist rule that it has implemented since, whether in Israel itself or the Palestinian West Bank, Gaza Strip and East Jerusalem. Let's take a closer look. Inside Israel, Palestinian citizens with Israeli passports face a variety of racist laws and practices. Through the passing of its nation-state law, the Israeli government is unapologetically clear that Israel is a state only for its Jewish citizens. In other words, if you are a Palestinian living in Israel, the government does not view you or treat you as equal. These Palestinian citizens of Israel also face policies that discriminate against them in every aspect of their life, whether in housing, land, or education.
Many Palestinian citizens of Israel, like myself, cannot even choose where to live. In dozens of communities across Israel, this right is held by admissions committees, made up of Jewish Israeli citizens who can decide whom to accept into or turn away from their communities. Put simply, I'm not allowed to live in many towns in Israel because I'm not Jewish.
In the West Bank, Palestinians live under Israeli military rule and are subject to a separate, far more harsh system of law than the one applied to Jewish Israelis. They are deprived of basic movement within the West Bank and experience home demolitions and theft of their land on a daily basis. Israeli settlers, on the other hand, have full political rights and are given financial support as well as vastly superior infrastructure, despite having illegally settled on Palestinian land. They are also able to move freely, without the countless restrictions placed on Palestinians who aren't even allowed to use many of the roads built on their own land. Palestinians in Gaza, also living under military rule, experience the harshest edge of Israel's regime. They live under a suffocating land, air and sea blockade imposed by Israel, which effectively imprisons them, and they are subjected to frequent violent military attacks that destroy Gaza's infrastructure, take thousands of lives and critically injure many more. And what about refugees?
Palestinian refugees like myself, even those who were born in historic Palestine, what is today the State of Israel, and their descendants are prevented from returning to their homes or receiving citizenship. However, under the Israeli law of return, any Jewish person in the world, including their children and grandchildren, can immigrate to Israel and become citizens of the state at any time.
A momentous report by UNESCWA in 2017 concluded that Israel's regime of domination over Palestinians constituted apartheid. In January 2021, B'Tselem, the largest Israeli human rights group, also defined Israel as an apartheid regime. And most importantly, Palestinian activists and human rights groups have been saying this for decades. So why use the word apartheid? The term apartheid helps us understand that the struggle faced by Palestinians is not just about isolated human rights abuses, but a regime of control that, by design, dominates the Palestinian people as a whole. What's more, defining Israel as committing the crime of apartheid places responsibility on the rest of the international community to work to end its practice. As Palestinians have repeatedly demanded, states have a responsibility under international law to hold Israel to account for this crime, including by putting sanctions in place until Palestinians can live in freedom and equality. Learn more about the Palestinian rights struggle and help us work towards a future where everyone is treated equally.